want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend for themselves. Hey, everybody, we are back. Another episode of the Free Like Me podcast. Guests come on, speak their truth, leave their pain and shame behind, and walk out of the studio free like me. If you would like to be a guest, or if you're interested in my coaching program, reach out to me on any social media site or on my website, freelike-me.com, and we'll set up a consultation call, and we'll get you in here, or we'll get you going on the coaching program. My book, Scarred, is up on Barnes & Noble, on Amazon. Its release date is July 29th, but you can pre-order it now. Don't wait till the last second. Don't make me come knock on your door and tell you to get your credit card out then. Let's get it going now. And I'm excited for this week's guest. He and I have been corresponding for years. And finally, we talked on the phone a couple months ago and set up a date. And Howard is here to talk about his childhood and to free himself and walk out of here, free like me. So let's meet Howard. Howard, my brother, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we're finally making this happen after talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, man.
Yeah.
And, we spoke on the phone a while ago, and I took notes, and I just looked at him last night, and I was just like, oh, boy, yeah, Howard had some crap in his life early on. And you're willing to talk about it, though.
Oh, absolutely.
And, there's so many people just stuck with their shame and their pain, and they're isolating, they're using drugs, they're self-harming.
Their fear.
Yeah, it's just like, your life is passing by because of your past. And I always like to ask guests, why are you willing to talk about this? You have some ugly stuff in the notes I have, and yet you told me before the cameras went on, I'm willing to talk about it all.
Yeah.
And so just like, why? How'd you get to the point that you're willing to talk about it all?
Well, without having two good role models in parents, father and mother, and nobody really to speak of what I experienced from till I was 9 years old, and then obviously the rebuilding of that. I had to do a lot of internalizing and asking questions because it wasn't something that was typically discussed back in the 60s. And then I started, speaking outwardly to people that I knew that were close to me, that I think that they could handle what I'm talking about because it's pretty ugly stuff. But communication was the key for me internally and eventually speaking outwardly. And then, once I started to come to my own conclusions and realizations of what I experienced, and it was very simply, I was in the eye of the storm. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, the oldest son. And it went from developments that I needed to understand to a certain level to I started sharing my story with other people, and only to find out they had their own story. And me being so transparent and open, and I have tremendous examples of stories of it I could share with you, that people felt so relaxed and comfortable with me opening up, just like we're doing today. Oh, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this experience. Somebody that can relate to what I experienced. And then it changed from a cleansing for me to helping others as a mentor, a role model, that you don't need to deal with this alone. Just like though I did, you don't. And that's why I was so inspired by what you're doing and why I'm here.
Awesome.
So, yeah. And, sometimes it's a little uncomfortable for my wife. She says I'm an open book. I am a complete transparent person. And I think sometimes it makes her feel a little uncomfortable. But at the same time, I always tell her the more I can help others and heal, the more it makes my ugly less ugly. Because now I'm putting it to use, just like you are.
Right. Just on Saturday, I ran into this, I don't want to say a woman I know, because I didn't really know her. I knew of her, but I know this older guy. He's in his 70s, and her and him, it's a very beautiful woman, gorgeous girl, younger. And she was asking me about my buddy, Dennis, how he was. And I said, "Oh, he's got to get a knee replacement, yada yada yada." And she's like, "Could you give him my number and I'll go have a cup of coffee with him, and I said, "Sure, give me your number." And she's like, "What's going on with your life?" She just
Mm.
happened to ask.
Right.
And I'm like, I got a book with Simon and Schuster coming out in July. I have a podcast. I coach people online. And she's like, "What about? What's your podcast about? What's your book about? What's
Mhm.
what's the coaching about?" And I'm like, so I just like laid it on, because I, like you just said, like
Yeah.
I'm an open book. I don't,
Yeah.
so I'm like, I was, molested and raped as a kid, and
Right.
gave her the rest of the story, and now I just want to try to help people get out of that,
Right.
box I was in. And she's like, "Oh my God," she's like, "I just can't believe you said all that. That's my life also." I'm like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, "Molested from 3 on, raped at 12,
Mm.
raped at 15,
Mhm.
one failed relationship, one failed marriage after another." And I was like, and you look at this woman and you would think she's got her crap going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you never know,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. When I tell my story to people that I went to grammar school and high school with that have known me forever, they're like, "No way. I had no idea how you were always so good guy, easygoing." Oh my God. I'm just like numb from what you just told me. I had no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Bravo for speaking up and just and knowing that it can help somebody else.
Yeah.
Because as soon as that other person hears you speak openly about it,
Right.
then that gives them the doorway to be like,
Right.
to unburden themselves.
Yeah.
And you're a very successful businessman. Just touch on, you do like really exotic pool work.
We're a full service pool and landscape design build firm of now going on 48 years. A boutique operation, family owned, but very high end, high quality work. So, um,
And
yeah.
that's in the New Jersey area?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and what's the name of your businesses?
Liquid ink and Liquidscapes.
Liquidscapes and
Yeah.
Liquid Ink.
Yeah.
And if people wanted to find you on social media, where are you at?
Instagram is where I invest most of my time, sharing.
Under Liquidscapes and Liquid Ink?
Liquidscape pools, I think. Yeah.
Liquidscape Pools?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if somebody wants to find you.
Yeah.
Where were you raised?
Born and raised in Union County, Mountainside, Westfield.
In New Jersey?
Yeah. Graduated Westfield High School.
Okay.
Yeah.
What year did you graduate high school? Just so people know.
Born in 1960 child.
Okay.
Graduated high school in 78.
Okay. So you're back, like back, towards me too. You're a couple years older than me, but just back in that era where nothing was talked about.
No.
Like, back then the thought of talking bad about a priest,
Yes.
or a Boy Scout leader, or a teacher, or
Yes.
anybody else,
Unheard of.
unheard of, and you would be thought of as a bad kid for
Right.
drumming up these fantasies.
Right.
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 Yeah. So it's just it was a different time, man.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we got stuck with our stuff in silence.
Yeah.
As little
Yeah.
kids, and it's tough to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take me in. You sort of hinted at being the oldest child in a family, that it might have been a family member who was, your tormentor and abuser.
Yeah.
Is
So
that the case?
Yeah. So what we were sharing earlier, my father was adopted by my grandparents.
And what'd they do
They were in the garment district.
in New York?
Yeah. And did very well.
Okay.
And obviously couldn't bear children of their own. So they adopted my father. So, from what I have unraveled on my own assessment, he was, definitely having a little bit of identity crisis, a little bit alienated. He was driven to school in a limousine at a very young age because of my grandparents' wealth. As I shared with you earlier, when my grandmother and my father had a big blowout and fight, and she basically finally said to him, "You're not even my own flesh and blood." And you already have somebody who has an identity crisis, who was a gay male, back in the, 50s,
So up to that point, he thought he was their child,
Yeah.
and then she laid that on him.
Yeah.
Hoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I remember my grandmother almost reminded me of like a Betty Davis type of role model,
Right.
not a very warm person. And, So he had changed his adopted name from Robert Paul Shapiro to Paul Roberts. And as I told you before, my father literally has three names:
Right.
his birth name, his adopted name, and then he changed his own name once he was 18. So he came from a very wealthy, flamboyant type of lifestyle, which I think he was also influenced heavy because he was very much into the black Cadillacs, the Lincoln Continentals. We had rooms in the house of antiques you wouldn't even sit on and touch. And he was an artist. I'm an artist. I've got my ability from him. Um,
So
but
he came from the fashion industries.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, and eventually became a pretty well-known bridal designer and things of that nature. If you got a Paul Roberts exclusive, supposedly it was a big deal. And he had a bridal shop in Westfield. He had a factory in Newark. But he definitely, I think, and this is again an assessment of my own, right? I don't not necessarily have confirmation, but my assessment.
Right.
And I think he tried to live a lifestyle that he was accustomed to as a child, because I know, after he took his life, I'm jumping a little bit. I mean, we were broke. I mean, we were living way beyond our means.
When your grandmother had this fight with him and said, "You're not even
My flesh and blood."
I mean, did they cut him off financially?
No.
They,
From my understanding, he was still under their wrap a little bit. But and I don't know when he realized he was a gay male, which was an unacceptable lifestyle, of course, back then, that he must have hidden pretty well. But I think he was kidding himself. I think people pretty much knew. But ironically, my mom came from not as wealthy of a family, and my mom was a beautiful woman. In fact, she eventually became a model for my dad. And he, said, I'm going to marry you someday. I'm going to sweep you off your feet. I'm going to marry you someday. So, my mom claims she didn't know my dad was gay, but she said he was very talented, very flamboyant as a designer. And she just associated that and put the two together, supposedly. But, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, but, my abuse with him, started at age 3.
3.
Yeah, as far as back as I can remember, where he would come into my room, into my bed, and touch me in ways that, as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, it went on till age 9. That I don't know any better whether this is proper or improper. Nobody told me as such.
That's what so many guests struggle with. They're like, when this starts happening at such a young age,
Is this normal behavior?
How do you know right from wrong?
Right,
Like, is
right.
this what's supposed to go on?
Mhm.
So your father comes in, he's touching you, maybe doing oral,
Right.
whatever other stuff.
Right.
And, I'm sure as guests say, as I got older, like it started to not feel like this should be going on. Maybe at 3, you can't really discern, right from wrong,
Right.
but I'm sure, by
Right.
8, 9, you're like, this is
Well, when I was forced to give him oral, I mean, I would be gagging,
right,
and this can't be proper. This
right,
can't be normal,
right,
you
right.
know. And as we shared, in our past conversations, he just had very odd methods of discipline. He would say, "Hey, kid, close your eyes," and he'd blow cigar smoke in my mouth, and I'd be gagging. He says, "Oh, you'll never smoke again," you know. And he had a bit of a temper at times. He was a pretty big man, and he would tell me to choose whether it was the cork sandals or the belt, for disciplinary action. Didn't really matter. Neither of them felt comfortable.
Right.
And as I told you, there was one instance that I guess I was still pooping in my pants. I don't even know what age that was. And he took the feces, and shoved it up my nose. And he said, "Don't leave the room. You're going to sit there, until it dries, and you're going to learn your lesson not to go to the bathroom in your pants."
Ugh.
So, so he just, he got involved in, his weight was fluctuating a lot. So he got involved in diet pills as well, which were like the equivalent of speed.
Back then, yeah.
So he got hooked on diet pills as well. And, a gentleman that was, totally disoriented in his life, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, looking at it as an adult, didn't know his place in this world, trying to live a heterosexual life by day. Hey, I've got 4 kids, I got a wife, I got a home, I got a career, and then, homosexual life at night. And he would sometimes take me out of my bed and bring me to his factory or bridal shop because he'd have a room there. We would go. Like I said, other times he would go with other men that ended up brutalizing him and beating him because he was gay. And, and my mom's assessment was, well, your father was never in my bed other than to have children, you know. And I'd always ask my mom, well, okay, but you never thought,
Where's he at?
where's he at? And how are your kids? And I don't know if she was fearful of getting out of bed. I have no idea, and she never really takes ownership of that.
Did you ever confront her on that?
The biggest problem, I told you before too. I guess it was getting to a point that even my mom said, enough is enough. I'm going to take the kids out of here. I'm going to leave you. And that weekend, he tried to kill her. Fortunately, that did not occur. And and ironically, the police did nothing because she ran out of the house with him chasing her with a knife to find the police. And the police did show up and basically reprimanded him and left. Did nothing. But we're talking 1969. A very different world.
Yeah, I had a guest. I had a guest on, a few weeks ago, and the same thing. Like he said, the cops were constantly at his house. His father beating his mother,
right? And
they would just be like,
a reprimand.
Yeah, like we don't want to keep coming back here again tonight.
Stop.
You got to stop. That's it.
So that particular morning. I was 9 at that time. My older sister was 11. My other 2 siblings were much younger. And, we heard all the broken glass and the screaming and going on. And by the time we had enough nerve to get out of bed and see what the hell's going on, both parents were gone. Like I said, she was running to the police and he was chasing her. Maybe he was delirious on diet pills at that time. Who knows, Right. And so, that weekend,
was he a heavy drinker?
I don't recall that.
Or any other drug? Just those diet pills stick out in your mind?
Yeah, which equate to like speed, uppers and downers.
Yeah. You mentioned, the part where, you pooped your diaper and he smeared it and specially filled your nostrils with it, made you sit there and let it dry.
Right.
And I wrote down from our initial conversation, a really powerful line. And I just want to, share that because to me, it really hit me.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, my father feels he is nothing and he wants you to feel the same way.
I mean, he was so lost.
Yeah.
Such a lost individual, felt probably unloved and unvalued by his parents. He's trying to figure out his place in the world, trying to live a split lifestyle. Obviously my mom was at the point where I'm done with you. I have had enough. So it was just getting more and more desperate at the same time. And I always say to people that I try to mentor like you are, I mean, he didn't grow up he probably had those things done to him for all I know by my grandmother or grandfather. My grandfather was a heavy cigar smoker. So, I always say people don't come into this world with those tendencies. Those are influences by others, right. So that, and as I speak so calmly about my dad, my dad was a pedophile, so I don't want anybody to think that because I speak so calmly of the abuse that went on for 6 years, that I don't realize how wrong that is, but at the same time, because I survived it and he didn't, he took his life at 36.
Take me into that.
I feel more bad for him at this point than for me because he couldn't figure it out and he had to take his life to end it, to figure it out, right. Where, I survived it. I got my second chance. And I always said to family, friends, my wife, thank goodness it happened around 9 years of age, because I would have become a teenager. We probably would have killed. I would have killed him. We would have killed each other. Something would have said to me.
So he left when you were 9.
No. The night after he tried to kill my mom,
Right.
she got us all out of the house.
Right.
That was a Friday, and we stayed with friends up the street.
Okay.
She said, "I'm done taking the kids." We get that weekend. That's when he asphyxiated himself in the garage.
So the weekend your mother takes you guys and leave.
Yeah, he was in the
That's
house.
when he kills himself.
He's in the house alone.
And what'd he do? Turn the car on in the garage?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And then when the police found him, he was on the floor of the garage. So obviously,
with the car running.
he had second thoughts because he got out of the car,
Right.
but it was too late.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wowzers.
And I think she was going to kind of blow the whistle on him too and just say, enough's enough. So I'm sure he didn't want to have to face those consequences.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So a pedophile father, and it's just like, like when you and I were talking before the show, and it's just like, all right, so you're in an era where being homosexual is not accepted.
Right.
I get it. And like, so you're like, your dad, is, very flamboyant, and it's just not an accepted time. And the
Right.
same for my guy, like my abuser, was a big, strong, muscular, special forces guy in Vietnam,
Right.
lieutenant in the county jail.
Right.
And it's not accepted, to be gay.
Right.
All right, that's one thing. But
Right.
crossing the line to molesting children,
Yeah.
like, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if he was molested as a child by my
Yeah.
grandparents. I have no idea.
Right.
Just
just go live your secret life then, having
Right.
your gay affairs,
Yeah.
You don't have to start molesting children.
Right.
It's just
Right.
Takes it to a totally different level.
Yeah. Yeah.
And man, it unraveled quick for him. You're chasing your mother with a knife,
Yeah.
and you guys leaving, and then boom, dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So hence as a kid, I was a complete insomniac. I never could sleep well.
So many of us.
you
Yeah,
know,
I hear you there too.
But
And why? Why do you? Because he would come in the middle of the night.
constantly being my room being invaded and woken up out of a dead sleep. Sometimes I'd be so disoriented, like I don't even know where I am. In the middle of the night, being pulled and brought to another location. Whether it was his bridal shop or his factory, and then just go to school the next day.
Like nothing happened.
Like nothing happened, because I was just like so lost in school. What saved me in school was that I was an artist, because for example, I never would read a book, and to get my grade up, I would do this phenomenal book cover, but I never read the book, and so I'd maybe bump it up from a D to a C or a C to a B, but it was really my artistic ability that helped me get through school. I was lucky to graduate high school.
Very similar to what you just said. Like I abandoned my studies, and like I was smart enough to get C's, occasional B, and I was fine with that.
Yeah. Well, after my father took his life, we literally had to have a fire sale. We were broke. There's no insurance. To interject some irony to this story, my stepdad was actually introduced to my mother as a lover originally, because my dad knew he couldn't satisfy my mom. So he introduced who now is my stepdad as my mom's lover. He was going through a tough divorce, tough marriage himself. And literally, while we were trying to unload our debt and sell our home in Mountainside, then the ex-wife jumped into our world, started, spray painting and painting our cars, writing lipstick on the side of our house, calling my mom a whore. I mean, it went from one crazy thing to another. So,
you guys were that family back in the day.
oh
huh?
my God. And ironically, the year before my father took his life, that's when the List family was murdered.
Oh,
right, right
yeah.
up the street from
That was
us.
in Westfield,
That's
wasn't it?
Westfield, but we were
Yeah.
right on the Westfield mountainside border.
All right.
We went to school with those kids.
Right.
So between the List family and my dad, it was just a crazy
Kept the newspapers busy.
time, just crazy. So yeah, we went from one crazy world to another.
How soon after your father's suicide did your mother and was it Bernie?
Yeah.
How soon did they get together?
Well, we finally sold our place in Mountainside. My mom was, smart enough. I give her a lot of credit for it. She took what we pulled from that and bought our house for $69,000 in Westfield, and we had no mortgage. She's like, at least, they can't take the house away from us. We'll always have a roof over our heads. So she paid for the house in full with no mortgage. And little by little, Bernie, became more and more of a frequent, part of our life. He was still going through his divorce. It was very ugly for him. Had to get a private investigator involved and all kinds of stuff.
Because of the ex?
Yeah. Yeah. Falsifying claims and all kinds of stuff, and can't work and can't do this and just trying to drain him, just totally drain him financially. So it was crazy, but they saved each other. They both couldn't have found each other at a better time. They've been together since 1969. He's like in his late 90s. My mom's in her early 90s, and they saved each other. And I'm thrilled and happy for them. Probably the biggest disappointment of that my mom and I have always talked about is she's like, I got a second chance on life. I'm putting that in the rear view, and Bernie, and I got a new start, and she had 4 kids, no job, finally had a job, career, or a home. But she never looked back to heal the family. She kind of closed the chapter. And I always used to say to Mom, even to this day, why didn't we heal? You want this close family now. You want this second chance. Your life is almost over. And you and your 4 siblings never really sat down and talked. I said, when it happened, we were 11, 9, 6, and 3. And she said, well, you kids were so young. I said, well, what happens when we, before you moved to California, when I was 18, and that's the biggest regret I have with our family, because when I think of our family, there's a disappointment there that we never did that.
Never addressed everything, and
Yeah.
everybody got to air their feelings and
Yeah.
talk about it and move on.
Yeah.
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 And then later in life, she's just expects everybody to be up to speed with her and
Right.
have forgotten about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I said, and we're all good people and we're all successful people, but I can't play the pretend game and sit down to dinner, break bread, and act like we're a close family. It's great that you and Bernie, found each other. You're beautiful together. I'm so happy for you, but we really missed an opportunity. And I can't emphasize enough, sitting here today, communication. It's a healer.
Transparency, breaking your silence, and
Yes,
communicating.
and the more you
Yeah,
break
man.
it, the more you break it down. So when my family and kids said, hey, Dad, you should go finally get some therapy, which I did when I was 60. I'm now 65, or a little bit more earlier than 60, and so I'd go back to my siblings and we would talk. Because none of my siblings even knew that I was being raped.
Wow.
My oldest sister said, I told her one time, and she's like bawling in the middle of the street, and she's like, I'm like, what are you crying? She goes, oh, Howie, I hated you all my life, but didn't know that was going on, and then that triggered a lot of things. And she said, now I feel bad because I knew our family wasn't normal, and I was told to keep quiet.
Wow.
And I was like, probably when she was like 7 or 8 or 9, and we were just, sharing, how we responded to things from our family. And one of the interesting things was, because I despised my older sister because I always felt she was very selfish because she chose her friends over her family. And she said, she goes, Howie, with how effed up our family was, I had no trust of you or anybody in the family. My friends were my support system. I was like, wow, now that makes sense, And I said to her, I had the complete opposite response from my abuse. I said, I trust everybody. I almost trust everybody to a fault. Even today, I give people too many chances. I give people too much of myself. I said, but after going through the abuse, I had to believe the world was still a safe place, and that people were still good. So,
or else what's there to look forward to?
right. And that served me well when I was young. But as I got older, I was definitely giving people way too much trust, way too many chances, handing all my cards up front, and so it helped and it's hurt at the same time.
You said to me back then, which I found interesting, who your closest companion was when you were younger.
Yeah. So that was the moon.
Yeah. I love that.
I would literally, look up at the moon out my window or riding my bike, and that's who I would talk to. Still today.
The moon was always there for you.
Always there, that constant companion. That's what I call it.
Didn't you tell me like you would go running in the middle of the night?
Oh, yeah.
Just like because you were always on edge with your father coming in. You were always up.
Well, I always had a lot of energy.
Yeah.
I was always testing myself physically, ironically, kind of like you're doing yourself now.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that I was physically fit enough that nobody could hurt me again.
Right.
Nobody could touch me.
And I mean, that's got to be what pushes me. It's like, I don't ever, I want to be, ready for whatever's coming my way,
Right. So, I mean, I'm going to jump around with a number of responses to what we're talking about. So I'm very, ironically, from all the crap I've been through, I am the most positive person you ever meet. I'm the most even keel person you ever meet. And using my son as an example, who works for me, he's like, Dad, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you put up with it. I don't know how this stuff doesn't stress you out. And I said, Bud, well, first of all, you never dealt with hardship, and I hope you never do. I said, but with the level of hardship I dealt with, the first 6 of my 9 years in this world, and then rebuilding my life from it ever since then, I said, everything that people get so wound up about is so small. It's so small. And I always gravitated better to people that went through hardship. And I mean true hardship, real hardship, because we have a different perspective on things. And so at a very young age, and having to grow up so much and having no faith in adults, no faith in religion, I'm like, so you can go to temple or you can go to church, but I can abuse my kid or beat my wife. That's okay. So I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person, because at a young age, I felt religion was so hypocritical. What do you believe in if you're allowed to do this once you leave that space, right? And nature really became my companion, and it was something I could trust, And so a classic line my wife would say is, you look at a 400-year-old oak tree as amazing as the birth of your own children. And I said, they're both miracles, but one is not better than the other at all. They're both miracles. And as I told you before, my oldest daughter, Carrie, that has this amazing aura about her, about treating people well and all that good stuff. And then we'll go for walks, and I feel bad sometimes that dear old Dad's got to kind of ground Carrie and say, you know what the problem with the human condition is? We put too much importance on ourselves. We think we're the smartest species on the planet, but we can't figure out it. We're still fighting today, thousands of years later. We're still fighting amongst ourselves, our differences, our fears. I said, nature, lives in harmony. It's got it figured out. I said, we think we own this planet. We don't own this planet. We're guests on this planet. We do as much damage as we do good to this planet, probably more damage. So I'm always grounding my kids since day one, about respect and value and appreciation and the things that matter, not the crap that everybody gets caught up in. So part of the blessing and curse of my experiences, it made me very grounded, saw things at a very different point of view of really what matters and what's important at a very young age. And most people still don't have that perspective and figured out. So I always say, right, there's a make or break in all of our lives. Nobody goes through life unscathed, but when you hit that make or break, it broke my dad. It made me stronger. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to hit the skids at some point. You know, you're not getting through life
Yeah.
without losing a loved one
Right.
or getting fired or
Getting sick.
having a terminal
Right.
or serious disease.
Mhm.
And like, so what are you going to do when you hit that bottom? You just going to wallow or are you going to rise up?
Yeah, and for me, part of the gift was tremendous perspective. So when I used to discipline my kids, especially my son, when he turned 18, and I said, you know, this whole idea that you're a man, an adult at 18 is the biggest joke on the planet. You're still living at home, first of all. I said, you know, when you're an adult, I said, you're an adult when you're accountable for your actions. That's when you're an adult. Good and bad, you're accountable. You own it. That doesn't mean you can't come to mom and dad for advice, you know, support, but you own it, dude. That's when you're an adult. I have people at my age still can't figure that out. Right. You know, it's everybody else's fault.
Yeah, and especially after you've been hurt at an early age, you know, and you still got that victim mentality.
Yeah.
You want to blame everybody and everything for where your life is at instead of just being accountable for it.
Yeah.
You know, we don't like to be accountable.
No.
You know, like, yeah, I had, you know, like you know, horrible circumstances early on. And I allowed that to dictate way too many years and decades of my life with
Right.
how I lived.
Right.
You know, like,
Right.
you know, you just have, it's not like you're proclaiming it to the world, but it's just like this inner thing of I've already faced the worst, so screw everything else, you know, and you just
and I can take on anything else too.
you just it makes sense then where running in the middle of the night out in nature, the moon is your best friend, that you would find a career working in nature, you know, landscape, you know, these beautiful designs you come up with.
Yeah.
It sort of makes sense that you went down that path.
Well, it's first, I'm a very big believer in that we're all born with innate talents. And it's so funny because the saddest part is when people don't realize what their talent is. And what their talent is the things that come easiest. And because it comes easiest to you, like, how's that a talent? Because it comes so easy to me. It is a talent. You know, so I'm a big believer in people, you know, realizing their abilities as soon as possible and developing them, right? So, so for me as a kid, other than sports and music, grew up in the '60s, great time for music and sports. Loved interior design, loved architecture, loved construction, loved physical work, loved nature, engineering, you know, all that stuff. So it's so ironic. I mean, like I said, I was lucky to graduate high school. College was not an affordable option for me. So sold my Buick, bought a pickup, started a little stupid little lawn maintenance company because I was on my own by 18, paying my rent. And then I realized being out in nature and doing landscaping, that was an art form. And then the passion just took over. That artist in me just took over because I kept waiting to find what that palette was for me as an artist.
Right.
You know?
So your abuse ended at 9 with your father's suicide. And like, what was the after effects going forward? You know, like, you know, you talked about your grades, you know, like barely getting through high school, you know, if it wasn't for your art, you know, to help salvage some grades.
Right.
You know, did you get into drugs, alcohol, self-harm, any of the thing destructive?
Well, I remember first, right after the suicide, we eventually sold our home in Mountainside, you know, mid-year in 5th grade, moved back to Westfield. So here I am in a whole new town, all new friends, completely lost. So
and you just had all this crap done to you
all
for
this
years.
crap. It was never discussed. It wasn't like, you know, my mom said to the principal, just so you know, this is what my son's gone through.
Right.
You know, she was trying to find a job, found us a home that we could she could buy. So, you know, the fond memory is I remember, you know, because I was an artist, everybody just hovering around me, ooh and on, like, wow, you know, we did a class project. You know, everybody couldn't wait to see what I came up with. But really in junior high, I would walk those halls like really lost, disconnected. Why does this even matter? not applying myself at all. The only teachers I really connected with were the ones that really cared about what they did, and I really respected and appreciated that, but so lost. Just trying to figure it all out, you know.
When did you first ever talk about it? Did you
Um,
did you mention anything to a class? Probably not to a classmate because you're
I
starting off at a new school. It's not like you want to start your relationship
I
with a.
honestly don't remember because
Was
I
it to
did
your wife? Was it?
no.
Can you recall
I honestly can't remember.
when you ever?
It was mostly answering my own questions through trial and error. Like I said, I had no respect for adults, you know, no value to adults, no respect to religion. I remember I got a brand new bike, never owned a brand new bike. Somebody stole it when I was in junior high. I was like so fucking pissed. Like I went on a rampage. I said, fuck everybody else. I'm going to steal bikes. So I did get into being a little bit of a klepto. I used to steal things to sell things so I'd have money. I used to steal candy to make money at school so I could get, you know, presents for my younger brother and sister, you know. Uh, I got into being a little bit of a pyromaniac a little bit.
Have
Uh,
you heard me talk about those two things?
no,
All right, because I've
I
mentioned that before.
was just fascinated by fire.
Yeah, and those are signs of sexual abuse.
Yeah,
When I was in prison, I was in a group therapy class, and one of the sessions, the therapist goes, "How many of you have ever shoplifted or stolen things?"
right.
Every hand went up.
Yeah,
And she goes, "How many of you have ever started fires or played with fire?"
right,
Every hand went up.
right.
And she's like, both of those things are signs of sexual
Yeah,
abuse. And and then hear you just say
yeah.
those
That's
two
weird.
exact things. Yeah.
Because for me, like when I stole stuff, I'd be like, you know what? I'm I'm owed it. I put up with a lot of shit, you know. I'm owed it, you know. Like fuck it. Why should I listen to any rules? I mean, I found a pack of cigarettes in the woods. Maybe I was 12. You know, I tried it. I threw it away. I was like, ugh. You know, I tried. My friends really got into drinking once they went to college. You know, I tried drinking. Not for me. I got that all out of my system early, and you know, marijuana was big back then, and cocaine was. I tried everything just to say, what's the big fuss?
Right.
And I was done with it. But I realized at a young age because I was in great shape, was a very physical person. I loved the physicality of sports, you know, man against man, you know, kind of thing. I could care less about winning. It was just a good competitive type of interaction, and one of my biggest fears, uh, because I only have one hot button, because I'm like this, is abuse. I'll be the first one to jump in. So my biggest fear was, you know, seeing somebody abused and destroying that person. That was my greatest fear. I'd have dreams of people attacking my family on the beach and dismembering them, tearing them apart, like tormenting dreams when I was, you know, at a certain point in my life. Because those protective instincts, you know, were going to kick in right away. So, but that kind of came and went. But um, as my therapist said, I was always the rescuer. If I don't care if two men got to hash out their differences by beating the crap out of each other and it's mano to mano, it's an even exchange, I'm good with it. That's the only way you can. But if already you know you're going to win the fight, that's abuse. That's abuse to me. So any type of verbal, emotional, physical abuse, I have no tolerance. That's my hot button. If my wife was here, she would say, you can tell how he's going to die tomorrow. He won the lottery. You'll see the exact same answer. Like, oh, okay. But that's my button. So that was a fear for a while.
Any type of injustice,
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. Just no tolerance. And part of the reason why I think I'm so even keel too is not just for what I went through. Also, I even think raising my voice is a certain level of abuse. So I've always lived my life by the golden rule. I treat others the way I want to be treated. That's how I live. But hopefully you treat yourself well as too. Respectful, you're caring. But yeah, I just have no tolerance for that kind of stuff.
Another thing you just touched on, our therapist said, like abuse victims have a thing against noise, high noise.
Yeah.
And like the noise in the county jail would just drive me absolutely insane. It was
Mhm.
so noisy, and
Mhm.
it would make me nuts.
Yeah.
And when I got to prison, and this therapist was talking about how abuse victims, majority of abuse victims don't like noise.
Yeah.
I was like, huh.
Yeah.
I just came from the 3.5 years
Right.
of noise, and it made me bonkers.
Yeah.
And then you just mentioned it too. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's similarities
Yeah.
amongst all of us.
Yes. Yeah.
And how, I mean, so you went, from 9 years old on without getting therapy,
Mhm.
until you were 60.
Right.
And yet you were able to like heal on your own and just
Mhm.
come to terms with it, uh,
How did I do that?
yeah, like,
Well, I think the immediate closure, right, was me just realizing I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I was in the eye of the storm, the youngest son, with around a man that was trying to figure out his own identity.
did you feel any relief when he committed suicide?
I didn't go to his funeral. Um, it's kind of numb, and it was more like he's gone.
Just didn't feel
Just
anything
didn't feel
towards
anything.
it, really?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for me in relationships and marriage is my wife can't, let me backtrack. I would always gravitate to other families for a sense of normalcy, right? I'm sure we all do that. And I finally found her family, 3 older brothers that I played ball with. Then I met her mom. Oh my God, we'd sit in the kitchen forever, talk for hours. Great dad, this extended, beautiful extended family of aunts, cousins, and uncles, which I never had because my mom was the only one to marry and have children, and my dad was the only child to have children. So we had a very small family. And I hit the jackpot. I was like, oh my God, I found the Brady Bunch.
And what age did you meet her at that this started?
She was 12. I was 15 when I started hanging out with the brothers. So her family really became my family and never let go. So the hardest part, actually, when we were going through therapy, was the therapist is telling my wife, you need to understand what it is to be with a person who's been abused. Here's books you should read. Here's things and 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 it's hard. She'll never know what it is to be in my shoes, and she knows that. But the hardest part for me and the frustration for her always was, but I came from a good family. Why doesn't that matter and account for anything? You know? So I have a hard time really stepping on that side for her. So, like when her dad was an amazing guy, died of leukemia. Her mom was an amazing mom, also died of cancer. But when her dad died, as much as I loved the man and respected the man, I was like, hon, that was my best day, you know. So I can't relate to you losing your father because that was my best day. So it was a very, hard time for her.
Yeah, yeah. And you said in a lot of ways her family saved you. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah, like maybe that was your healing.
yeah,
Is to see normalcy in a
yes,
family.
yes.
Like, wow, all right, so this is what
This is what it's supposed to be.
right. And then when you have your own family with her,
Right.
you have a template now.
Yes.
Yeah, instead
Yeah.
of the dysfunction you grew up with.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
cool.
yeah.
To sum up your journey, I told you I would want to ask you at the end, like going through all this crap, what's it, what life lessons, what's it taught you? What habits keep you healthy? Do you have regrets? What can you share with the audience who's been in a similar situation and still stuck?
Right.
What could you, to sum everything up in your life to this point?
Yeah. So kind of starting from age 9 on up, again, it's the immediate is communication, even if it's maybe just internally, and finding your answers. Because usually the answers, again, are just like mine, just like yours. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. You didn't ask for this, it came to you. You were a victim of that environment. So right off the bat there, that's a huge leap, to get to the other side. and then start to then
That you didn't do anything to bring this on.
right,
You were
right, just in the wrong place at the
an
wrong
innocent
time. Right,
victim in the wrong place at the
right,
wrong time.
right.
Right.
But then don't stop there and say, okay, I was an innocent victim. You still have value. You still have merit. So, you know, whatever is still giving you angst and insecurity and all this crap that's filled in your head and your heart, you know, break it down. Break it down yourself and say, you know, I've answered all the things that I need to answer to move forward, and then start to reinvest in yourself. You know, so again, for me, being around most of my friends that grew up in normal circles, I was always the leader of the pack. I was always the adult because I had experienced so much, had to put up with so much, and had to figure it all out. Um, that became really a valuable tool to me because they didn't know how to cope with certain things, and I helped them cope with it because I already had. So I started to realize my value. But yeah, it's that initial part, and then start to invest in yourself. Um, you know, I was always the first guy at everything, right? First guy to own his own business in my circles of friends. They were going to college, drinking like madmen. They're like, come on, we're going to go out and party tonight on a Saturday. I'm like, I got to go to work tomorrow. I have a company now. I'm 18. I have a company. I have people counting on me. And the irony was, by the time I was 18 and out of high school with no real clear direction, the one thing I did know I needed was structure and discipline because I was living in chaos. I was my own man by 9. Nobody was telling me anything, and I wasn't going to listen to anything. So, but I did realize by the time I was done with school, I was like, all right, I'm out of school. Where am I going with my life? And I was going to either join the force, uh, the army or military, or become a police officer or something to give me this. But ironically, for me, started my own business at 18, having to pay my own rent, pay my own bills, being an entrepreneur was the structure for me because I had to be accountable. I had to be responsible. So ironically, me starting my own business at 18, I'm not saying that's what everybody should do because I've been in business now 48 years. That was the structure I needed. My wife's family, absolutely. They gave me that sense of normalcy. So find that, find where you need to find, that support system that you seek, not that you think you want, that you seek. So, and I always said to my wife, I fell in love with your family before I fell in love with you. That's the truth.
What age did you get married?
She was 22, I was 25.
Okay.
So,
did you, I mean, like so many of us who've been abused struggle with intimacy. Like, has that, and I'm not talking, I'm not getting into sex with you here, but just the intimacy.
well,
Did you ever struggle with that with
I
her?
always want, because I'm a pretty sexual person and I'm a very cuddly, touchy, I love that physical touch. And I was like, was I born that way? Or is that because I went through physical contact at a young age? I'll never know that. I'll never know that. But definitely, on the emotional stage, it's tough because, um, I had to shut down the emotions to get through it. And by the time I was 18, I was already pretty conditioned emotionally. So one of the classic conversations, my wife and I would have is she always has to be the emotional crutch. She always has to be the one to come to the other side. And I'm saying, you're right. I'm not emotional. I'm not reactionary. I'm a process person. I think things through. I evaluate things deeply. And I would say, well, here's the upside for me. I said, look, I'm not the type of man or husband that yells, screams, fights, is abusive. I said, we just got the car out of the body shop. We went to get lunch. You banged the car. I came into the body shop. I said, I think we got a new record. I said, how long was it since I was here? 20 minutes? I said, I didn't overreact. I didn't get mad. It was a mistake. It wasn't intentional. I said, or I'm not the possessive husband or the jealous husband, or I'm not the type of husband that when things get hard, I fall apart. I said, so there is an upside to me not being as emotional. There's pros and cons to both. So another thing I want to add that because things are popping in my head, um, as a young adult, I would always ask the question that if I had normal parents and I grew up in a normal life, what would be my capacity, my potential? And that's what drove me still today.
Right.
I would always ask that question and keep seeking the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just amazed at the self-awareness you had of yourself coming out of what you came out of, not getting any support at home, not getting any therapy, not, and yet you had all this inner knowledge that you knew, like you knew you needed structure.
Right.
Like without that structure, like, your buddies want to go out and party. Most of us take the partying to the extreme,
Right.
especially after we've been abused. Like I
Right.
know I did, and
Yeah.
every guest here pretty much has.
Yeah.
And yet you had this, you were able to have this inner dialogue with yourself, like,
Mhm.
I need structure. I need this.
Well, I was just interviewed in a podcast that I was recommended because of business. It was about business, and I disclosed my background, so they even found it more interesting. And he said, what if his question was, who is your role model, your mentor? And I said, I don't have one. I said, but life experience is my role model and mentor. What I learned from those life experiences.
You were able to move on your own and develop on your own, where
Right.
so many of us self-destruct for a long time before we
Right.
hit bottom and then
Right.
make a choice whether we're going to move on.
Well, I realized when alcohol and I got together, because I had so much energy, not a good mix. So I'd be that guy that would get all hopped up from drinking. And I wasn't a big drinker. It was my friends were the big drinkers. And because I had so much energy, I'd be so physical, and then I'd be the same guy an hour later, putting my arm around you, hugging you, going, I love you, man, and it wasn't to hurt. I was just so physical. And so I realized in my early 20s, alcohol is not, a good thing for me. It gets me going too much,
Right.
So.
Again, self-awareness.
Right.
Yeah, like where others would just be like, it gets me going on when I'm going to go.
Right, right, right.
Uh,
Well, what also, happened in our life, we got pregnant on the pill. That's why my daughter is now almost 40. And, once you become an adult and have a child, that's an eye opener for you as well. Now you got to be a role model for that kid too.
I take my hat off to you for figuring it out on your own, pretty much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you had to do it on your own. That's not easy. I just, I just hear story after story of, and my own story. Just struggling for so long before, like.
Well, I hope that gives people a realization that you can do it.
Yeah,
you can do it.
Right.
I work for. It's so funny. I'm lucky to graduate high school. I've worked for the wealthiest people on the planet, presidents, athletes, entertainers, every CEO and CFO you can imagine. We do major projects. Projects for us are 300,000, 700,000, $1 million, 2 million, 3 million, major stuff, really high end.
What's the biggest expensive project you ever?
$3.5 million.
$3.5 million
for the former CEO of Merck.
Oh.
On a 40-acre site. We landscaped 7 acres of property of the 40.
That's a lot to landscape.
Yeah. Major,
Yeah.
stone bridges and, all kinds of crazy stuff that the Army Corps of Engineers had to approve, major stuff.
Wow.
And I tell the kids all the time, here's these people, they're supposedly the smartest, wealthiest people on the planet, the best schools in the world. I'm always disappointed.
Yeah.
Because I can't believe, and they're going to hate me for me saying this, but some of the stupid shit that comes out of their mouth. I'm like, wow, how come I see that? And I'm lucky to have a high school diploma. And with all the shit and crap I went through, that you don't see what I see. It just blows me away. Like, think it through. You you're cowboying this. You're winging this. I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to make sure you make good value decisions, and I'm always disappointed. It's incredible to me.
Wow.
And even my wife's 3 brothers, and I respect and love all of them. And one of the classic conversations we used to have, because in my opinion, the 2 oldest are well below what their potential was. Smart, intelligent guys, talented, good role models, great home. And to me, they're well below where they should be in their life. And I'm like, how does that happen? They came from this and I came from shit. It's just so, I find the human condition so fascinating, what makes people tick. And the biggest problem I see in the world now is fear. So many forms of fear. Everybody's so afraid to be transparent, to be themselves, to put themselves out there. We all need and want the same things.
Right.
And
also those of us who have experienced at an early age intense trauma.
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a fuel that can be used for growth
Yes.
and for achievement.
Yes.
Yes, we can use it for destruction for a long time, but just like anger doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing.
Right.
Anger can be fuel for
Right.
achieving a lot.
Right.
And
look what you endured. Look at your capacity. If
Right.
you can manage that, you can manage anything.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have it in you.
Yep.
So
thanks, Howard.
thank you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for opening up and sharing. And
Awesome.
Again, I really take my hat off to you for figuring this crap out on your own, man.
It's all good.
And we can overcome.
Yeah.
We can do it.
I'm happy to help anybody that you're in contact with. Be my pleasure.
Right.
So
Facebook, how do they find you?
Just under either Howard Roberts or Liquidscapes.
Liquidscapes, Howard Roberts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Here to help.
Thanks, bro.
Thanks
for being here.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Another edition of the Free Like Me podcast. Thank you to Howard for opening up and being transparent and not being afraid to share what he went through. It is not our fault. We just are in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. And the abuser, they hold all the blame. You do not hold any blame. We'll see you next week. Peace.